I can speak. I'll be loud.
I really want to know more about the neurophysiology and the basis of this fusion.
Great, thanks, Lindsay. So it's my pleasure to have this opportunity to present. So I sort of mentioned that I study memory, and these are the kinds of things that I do in my life, which is use magnetic resonance imaging, MRI. This is my brain. Some of you might know this is a play on a Magritte painting, a snip-out and beep. This is not a pipe, and this is not art, but it's me. It's my brain. And so it is art. And what I tend to do in my laboratory is to use this magnetic resonance imaging to actually look at not just anatomy, but physiology. You look at brain activity. So I get you in the brain, I study memory, have you try to remember something that you did yesterday, what you had for dinner, and then we can see the areas of the brain that are active. Presumably that's not why I'm here. I have an interest in how we experience art, how we look at art and the brain processes associated with it. And I won't even talk about that very much. I'm thinking that Michael might spend some time talking about some of his MRI work with music. What I thought I would do is sort of touch on the goals of this workshop and try to, from my own perspective, I was thinking that I'm not a field scientist, except that's my field over there, and to try to provide a little bit of some perspective from my own point of view. And what I like to think about lately is this question I think is very important for the people who are going to be evaluating your ultimate project, is that what is art for? What is its function? And it's a wonderful thing, if you haven't done so already, around dinner time amongst friends, as you ask the question. And it's very, very much like talking about religion or politics. It becomes a very heated argument exactly what art is and what its purpose is. And I've been having a lot of fun thinking about that. What I also mentioned is what Ernst Gombrich, the noted art historian, talked about as the beholder's share. That is, in terms of the pliability of perception, you might look at anything out in the world, and we bring to it, from our knowledge, from our memories, from our past experience, from our culture, we bring to at the forefront information and experience that allows us to interpret. And I think that's very important when we think about art and when we think about the world, actually. And at the end, perhaps to try to bring this, again, this notion of memory and learning and knowledge acquisition into the forefront of this workshop, is to try to suggest how we can bridge the art experience and the science experience to give us some kind of a learning experience. Okay, so just in one slide on what is art for. I always like to show this image, which is Monet's Regatta Argenteuil. I bought this poster. You might know that in college campuses at the beginning of the semester, they have these guys selling posters and art things. So I bought this poster when I was a freshman 135 years ago, before he even painted this, actually. And I put it up in my campus room, and I had it framed, and I had it in my lab, in my office, someplace for about 40 years of my life, and I loved it. And it always reminds me of something interesting. And at that time, of course, I think for me, it was eye candy for me, right? And we all have this. If you ask anybody out going to a museum, why are you at the museum? They will probably give you this 18th century view, is that I'm here to look at pretty things and get interested in the emotion of looking at artworks, right? And it's this art for art's sake point of view, and I think if we all believed in that in this room, we wouldn't be in this room, because I think the whole interest in trying to use art in the field of science is to try to do something more than just that. And of course, it then becomes multifaceted, because for different people have different views and perspectives about what is art for. And of course, there is that emotional component. I think you can't get around it, although I've talked to many art critics these days and postmodernist kinds of viewpoints where they want to take out this role. But I think it's very, very important, particularly for all of us, and it's important, interesting, and it's fun for me to think about this painting here. And some of you know that when it first came out, it wasn't as viewed as eye candy. It wasn't aesthetically interesting. In fact, it was viewed as disgusting, and there was a lot of anger associated with Impressionist works. And in the same sensory experience, we, with our 21st century eyes, see beauty and grace, right? So that's something interesting with the pliability of perception right here. Same stimulus, different interpretation, right? So we have to understand that our background, our culture, all of our knowledge drives the very things that we see. And so I'm going to try to, instead of give you data, I'm going to try to give you some demonstrations of why this is. And of course, one of the main things I think for this workshop is to think about how we can learn from art in addition to learning from science and what it brings to the art and science table. Oh, I'm sorry, this is my shameless plug. I wrote a book, just out in paperback, Experiencing Art. So it's about how we look at art. Rather than Amy's side of the creativity of the artist, I'm particularly interested in how we experience an artwork and how we behold art. Right? And so the way I've characterized it is a very, very simple thing, and it helps me set up a framework, so I thought I'd share it with you. You know, in every case, you have an artist who has an intention of producing an artwork, and what I'm particularly interested in is what does the beholder do? And most people would argue that, well, you see something and you get an emotion. And what I like to argue, because I study memory, is that knowledge does play such an important role, an equally important role, in the way we interpret and understand artworks. Right? And so I want to kind of drive the story in terms of art and knowledge. And in particular, I think when all of these parts of your psyche are highly excited, both the sensory, the conceptual, and the emotional aspects, I think that's when you get that wow feeling when you see an artwork. Right? And all three of those systems in your head are active. And when people talk to me and ask me about the brain and art and how we experience it, I tell them, well, there isn't any sort of art beauty center of your brain, right? There isn't any, like, your art gallery in your head that's active, right? And my term is sort of this old Bill Clinton-esque term, it's the whole brain stupid, right? So your whole brain is active, and it doesn't mean that we can't understand and study it. We just have to understand that it's an integrative process, and that involves these three components primarily. Okay, so let me give you a few examples of how, of the pliability of perception and how knowledge drives our viewing. And so this is a magazine cover from a while back from Bo Lotto's laboratory. And when you look at this, we see a cube in 3 dimensions, and we see these blue spots. And you might not believe this, but if I put a light meter to look at those blue dots and how much light is reflected of it, they're all the same. They're all exactly the same, although all of us see this thing, it's almost luminescent, right? And the only way I can really convince you, if I Photoshop out the stuff, you'll see that they're the same color, right? And so you see the context, and all of a sudden this thing is much, much brighter. That's in your head, I'm sorry to say, right? And so we bring to the sensory experience knowledge. We know, or we think, just like Magritte said, this is not a pipe, this is not a cube, this is a picture of a cube, right? But even though in our heads we think cube, we think it's in a shadow. These are in different shades of this environment. And if this were a real cube and real colors, this would reflect less light, right, than this one, right? This would be actually darker to our retina than that one. Well, since this was drawn the same color, they're not darker, we put in our heads, this is a real cube, and we translate that into that spot patch being much lighter. Does that make sense? So we're actually putting into all our visions expectations and knowledge and beliefs, and that can even supersede what's out there. Right, here's my other fun example. This is not me photoshopping my wife and my son. This is just a silly, fun thing that we did. Some might recognize. Anybody recognize that location in Paris? It's Place de Vosges, where we happen to be. I just had my son, just for the fun of it, stand way back, yards away, right by this other fountain, and have my wife put her hand out to make it look like they're both at the same picture plane, and all of a sudden I make my son 3 inches tall, right? So here's another example of Roger Shepard. Amy mentioned scientists who are artists. Roger Shepard is a very prominent psychologist, was at Stanford, he's emeritus now. He would spend his time listening to boring lectures, doodling. Well, his doodles were really impressive. His colleagues asked him to publish a book of his doodles. And this is one of them, which I find fascinating, because these two monsters, as he's drawn them, are exactly the same size. They're exactly the same one. Although the monster in the background looks probably about 50% taller, bigger, just because of the perspective of the image. And again, if I take out the context, they are exactly the same image, but you put the context back in. And again, if this monster is the same size as the one in the background, then it will be smaller, right? It's not smaller, and therefore we perceive it to be bigger. Again, it's all in your head, right? You can measure these things, and they're exactly the same. My graduate student did a fun thing just a few years ago. There's actually another illusion in this. It's an emotional illusion. If you ask people, and Diane Marion in my lab did, if you ask people, what is that guy feeling? What does somebody want to give me some emotion? Anger. What is that guy feeling? Fear. It's the same object, right? So again, in this case, it's an emotional context, right? Here's a situation in which you have a social context. That's the chaser and that's the chasee. And we impugn different emotions in the same physical identity. So I think it's kind of fun. Oh, yeah, so just to show you that my son isn't 3 inches tall, this is a few years later. They are in the same picture plane, and yes, he is about a foot taller than my wife. Okay, so here's my another demonstration specifically asked for by Farthen. But I do have to divide the room in half. So this is group A. You get to decide which group you get to be in, okay? Group A and group B on this side of the room. And I'm going to have to ask each of you at one time, group 2, close your eyes. In fact, I'm going to ask group 2 right now to close your eyes. Okay, you got to close your eyes. Group 1's, I'm going to ask you to open your eyes later on, so don't fall asleep, group 2. Group 1, open your eyes, and I'm going to show you the stimulus. It's very, very simple. I just want you to rate on a scale of 1 to 5. How happy or sad do you think this person is? 1 being very sad, 5 being happy. Just don't say anything. Just put it in your head. Okay, I'm going to show you the stimulus, show you this person. 1 being, from a scale of 1 being very sad to 5 being very happy. Here you go. Okay, just think of that. While you're thinking of that, close your eyes. Group 2, open your eyes. Okay, same thing. I'm going to show you stimulus. Just rate 1 very unhappy, 5 very happy. While you're looking at this stimulus group, 1's eyes are closed. Here we go. Okay, everybody open your eyes. And then I'm going to show you a stimulus. And everybody's eyes are open. Same stimulus. This is a very, very simple test. This time, I'm just going to ask you whether the person is a male or female. Okay, very straightforward. Everybody's eyes are open. Who saw a male? Raise your hands. Who saw a female? Raise your hands. Okay. I mean, wait a minute. It's the same stimulus, right? That's right. So who saw a male? Raise your hand. Okay. Who saw a female? Raise your hand. Isn't that great? Okay. I'll show it to you again.
I saw the male right at the end of this.
Okay. So here's the trick. You know, when you were at group 1, you know, saw 1 stimulus. Group 2 saw another stimulus. Right? When I showed you that the male-female, you saw an ambiguous stimulus. And what you saw before, what your experience was, drives your perception of that object. Right? There's just the mood thing was just a way to look at the image. It has nothing to do with this experiment. But the idea, and you can actually, we call this priming. You can actually just look at that and look at that. You'll see the woman right there. Look at that, you'll see the face. Right? And so the point here again is that your perceptions are pliable. They're extremely defined by what you're thinking, expecting. And so in terms of how we actually integrate this information, I think your task, the task involved with trying to integrate field science with art, is how to think, from my perspective, how do you think to offer some kind of way to provide a knowledge base for the people who are coming to the sites and seeing this integration, or what the artists need to do and what the science need to do in terms of finding some way to bridge things. And I'm really excited tomorrow to look at the invisible barn. I spend a lot of time talking to educators, and one thing that I've been doing a lot is trying, because I've been interested in art, trying to give them the art question. And the thing that I find interesting is that you can learn a lot by just asking this question to kids. You know, do you like it? What makes it interesting? And suddenly you're putting feeling into the learning process itself, right? And just by those questions, you are actually developing a way for them to think about something with emotion, with feeling, but it also is a learning environment as well. And it can stir emotions and interest. It encourages further learning. I think most importantly, perhaps, it allows sort of a social and non-evaluative way of thinking about how to gain knowledge from experience. And Howard Gardner, a very prominent psychologist, once said, "Nobody ever fails museum." So you can always find ways to instill learning and provide a way to do it in a way that's not non-evaluative, not critical at all. And so I think I'm hoping that we can find ways in the discussion to try to develop some kind of integration between the two, perhaps along some of these lines. Okay, thank you.